2, a 1. What's happening, YouTube? You are back in the building with 2 parts of the Avengers of Life games. Me and Larry, and we've got my big homie Terrence, who is a police officer, still works as a police officer. He came through to show us some love, to help us better bridge this gap that has been burned up like you went to KFC 11 o'clock at night thinking you're going to get extra crispy. That bridge is burnt. And so he's going to try to help us. He's going to try to help us pull that bridge together. We're going to ask him some police questions in terms of how the things was handled bad with George Floyd. But without further ado, Terrence, introduce yourself. Tell the people your background and what brought you into police work.
Well, man, my whole life I've always been in that type of field. When I was 19, I went into basic training for the military. I wanted to serve my country. And then I spent another 13 years of my life in the anti-terrorism security sector, private security. I've done all. And about 5 years ago, I felt a strong calling to move into law enforcement. And it's not anybody will tell you that's in this career, calling. I mean, it's not a job, it is a career, but it's more of a calling is, it's, you don't make a lot of money at it. It's not something you do for money, and it's not something that if you have the right motivation, you do for any kind of fame or power or anything like that. It's a public service job. That is the root core of what it is and what it was created for. Law enforcement at its truest, at its heart, is a public service. And so moving into that, I just had a heart for public service. And I felt like in order to have a direct impact on my community, and for my community to be the type of community that my kids and my grandkids, I was sharing with you earlier, but, for them to be able to grow up and be in a community that I had some part in, maybe even it's just a small part of being a safe community and being a community that they should be proud to be in. That was my heart for going into law enforcement. It's really to help people, man. And that really should be the motivation for anybody that goes into this. And when you go into any kind of academy, when you go into training, all the instructors I've ever had talk very heavily about that. They talk about, listen, like I said, you're not going to make a lot of money at this. You're definitely not going to get famous doing this. And I didn't use the word infamous. I used the word famous. This isn't going to be a career that you're going to do or you should do for any ulterior motive. It should be because your heart's for it. And I always respected that then for putting that out there to us and not giving us any kind of notions of anything else. Like you're going to go into this career to have power over another person, or you're going to go into this career to drive cars fast or something like that. I mean, I'm saying that kind of jokingly, but I don't know what everybody's motivation for going to law enforcement is, but they made it very clear that your motivation should not be self-centered, because this isn't a job where you can't be successful at this job and be self-centered.
Do you mind if I ask how old your kids are?
Well, I've got 2 that are grown and out of the house, and I've got 1 that's still in school.
All right. Now, I understand that, and not to get too personal with it, but I understand that you are in an interracial relationship. And so I'm assuming that your kids are biracial?
Yes. My children are mixed, yes.
So what do you tell them when you talk to them about when they go out into the world? Because I didn't ask about what racial makeup your kids are, so I don't know if your spouse is black.
My children are mixed. My children are mixed African American.
Okay. So my question is what do you tell your kids when they go out into the world? Because if you have your kids may know you and they may think of themselves as biracial, but when they step out of that house and they get stopped by a cop, they're not biracial, they're black. And that's what cops see. They're gonna look at them and they're gonna say, this is an African American. They're not gonna look at them and say, oh, this is a person who's mixed, who has a white father, and who has a cop who's a father. They're gonna look at them and they're just gonna see a black male or female, whatever. What do you tell them to stay safe? Because I know as a cop, you have seen things from your fellow officers that have made you uncomfortable. I know that you have. My father, I know it's impossible for officers not to. My father was a deputy sheriff for 33 years. One of my best friends is a deputy sheriff. He has been since he was 19 and a half when he was able to enter the academy. You know, one of my other best friend that we all went to school together, his little brother is an LAPD officer, has been on the force for 25 plus years. I know a lot of cops, and they have all told me that they have seen things that make them uncomfortable. And so I'm curious about what you tell your own family members, because I know what my father has told me, you know, when I was growing up. I know what he told me, but I would like to know what you know, because you have a unique perspective. My dad was a black cop. You're a white cop and married to, you know, to a black woman that has mixed kids. I mean, it is a unique perspective that you have in the world.
Well, I've always told my children to be, you know, respectful of, and I mean, nobody's perfect. I mean, you know, people speed, people do things that could cause just almost like a, what's the word I'm looking for? Interaction with law enforcement that was, I mean, could be a mistake, or it could be intentional. I don't, you know, all the different things, the complexities that would bring my children into contact with law enforcement, and they could be in trouble. You know, they could be in the wrong. They're my children, but they could be in the wrong. And whenever they have their interaction with the law enforcement, I've always just told them to be respectful of law enforcement. You know, to feel that person out. I mean, you really just, you know, listen, observe how that person carries themselves. It's just like judging any other person on the street. When you have a first interaction with any other person, in a few seconds, you're going to know. I mean, it's not going to take long for your intuition to tell you, hey, this is a good person or this is a bad person. I've never prepped my children for a violent confrontation with the police because my mind just doesn't go there. Because I don't default to that. But I understand that a huge part of the perspective and a huge part of the problem right now is because of current events, because of what we're seeing, because of what we're hearing, because of what we're exposed to. I mean, I'm almost like bombarded with all the time is a perspective that can be negative. And it honestly does have to be a narrative that it's unfortunate, but it is a narrative that is going to have to be covered with people. And I think as the future moves forward, not just with people minority, but just people interacting with law enforcement. I think this kind of thing pushes a narrative. It says, hey, you know, what if, because guess what? You're not just dealing with a cop, you're dealing with another human being. And in every group, the clergy, education, I mean, you can take any large group, small group of professionals, and there's going to be bad apples. There's going to be people that aren't bringing the best parts of them into their career. They're allowing their career to expand the worst parts of them. If you touch children and you're in an environment with children all the time, if you have that stuff going on here to begin with, and you're in an environment touching children, that bad apple is going to eventually do what's inside of here. Does that make sense?
So I guess I think some of what he was asking is some of what I wanted to know in terms of what am I going to tell my own child, or when I go and meet families who have young children and they look at me as someone that they respect, role model, whatever, and they say, Lamont, what do I say to my child? I was going to ask that question, but he went on ahead and asked, and I think that's kind of what we was getting at, because we just want to know how do you handle the situation, and also, like I said before, how do you know if you're dealing with someone who's on the up and up as a police officer?
And I'll tell you one of the reasons why I asked that. And one of the things my father told me when I was growing up, when I was a teenager, he told me, if you ever get arrested, if you ever get detained and a cop puts you in his car and he drives you somewhere other than the police station, don't get out of the car no matter what. Fight like your life depends on it to stay in the back of that car. If he's going to beat you, if he's going to kill you, make him do it in the back of his car where there's a possibility that maybe there'll be some evidence and he'll get in trouble for it. And when I was 20 something years old, when I was 20 something years old, I was going to school in Pennsylvania. I had got a job working at a newspaper as a photographer. I was excited to come home. My girlfriend just got accepted to, got a full scholarship to USC. And so we were going to California. We had literally just that night just got in from driving to California. And I had been bragging to her for 2 years about In-N-Out Burger. So we dropped off our luggage at my brother's house. I was heading to In-N-Out Burger.
Wait a minute. In-N-Out Burger.
I was heading to In-N-Out Burger, man. I was bragging to her for 2 years about this.
Oh my Lord.
And got pulled over. The cop pulls over. He's screaming at me. He has his gun pulled on me. He's screaming at me, get the F out of the car, get the F out of the car, and I'm like, my dad told me, he said, if you're frightened, if they have a gun and you're frightened, tell him to ask for a supervisor. I did everything I thought. I turned the car off. I mean, I grew up in Los Angeles, so I knew the routine. Turn your car off, roll your window down, take the keys out of the ignition, right over left, hands out the window. I did the whole thing. I wanted to make sure there was no possibility that he viewed me as a threat, that I was reaching for anything or whatever. And, so I told him, I said, I want you to get a supervisor. Screaming, get out of the car, get out of the car. And eventually another officer pulled up, and it was a female officer, and she asked, why won't you get out of the car? And I said, because he's got his gun on me and he's screaming at me like a lunatic. I'm terrified. I'm not going to get shot tonight. And I said, I asked for a supervisor. So, eventually she's calm. I get out of the car, and she tells me, you're going to be arrested. I'm like, for what? She said, well, you're going to be arrested for suspicion of selling drugs because you have an out-of-state license plate. And she says, why do you have an out-of-state license plate? I said, because I just came from out of state tonight. I said, my girlfriend just graduated from college and she's coming out here to go to grad school. I just left college so I can take my dream job working at, for Gannett as a photojournalist. And that's why. I was like, I literally just got in town tonight. I haven't even had a chance to change over my plates. And so she says, well, you're getting detained. So anyways, the guy handcuffs me, puts me in the back of his car, and drives me to a dark ass empty field and parks the car and tells me to get out. And the only thing that I could think in my head was what my dad told me years ago is, fight for your life to stay in the back of this car. Absolutely do not get out of this car. And he was telling me to get out. And I told him, I said, I'm not getting out of this car no matter what. I was like, you're going to have to kill me in the back of this car. I'm not getting out. And after we went back and forth a few times, I guess it was his sergeant came up from behind him. And I thought, oh, here we go. I'm just dead now. And the next thing I know, I guess his sergeant got out and started screaming at him, what the fuck are you doing? What in the fuck are you doing? Get this kid to the station. And was going off on him. And
well, see, that's guy.
But
that's the narrative change here is, I'm the one that is on the other side of that. In fact, that exact same scenario would be me if I was the supervisor in that other situation. Fortunately, I work for a fantastic group of guys. I have never been forced as a supervisor into anything that sounds even remote to that.
See, this is the thing. If I had not, if my father had not told me what to do, if I had not had the luxury of having a father who was a law enforcement veteran, I might have just gotten out of the car thinking I had no rights. And I might have ended up getting killed. He might have beat me to death or shot me or whatever. And I could not be here today.
Oh, wow. See, that's the advantage of having these conversations. I didn't even know that. I just learned something.
I mean, it was.
It's okay if I jot some stuff down while you're talking.
Yeah. Go for it. Yeah, go for it.
One of the things you just said is know your rights, guys. Know your rights. I was going to, one of the documents that this guy right here, I don't know if you can see it. It's the Constitution. I got it upside down. How embarrassing. But I keep this in my car. And when you go through the academy or depending on whatever agency you go through, you can either go through an academy for that agency where they have more of a fine tune of who you are and go into their agency, Charlotte, Raleigh, big here in North Carolina, big places. You can go through a smaller local agency, but more likely if you're with a smaller agency, it's more of a generalized law enforcement umbrella that you get a license to be able to go and be a part of a smaller organization. But every single one of those, one of the biggest sections that you are tested on and you have to be competent in is the Constitution. So I'm saying all this to say, know your rights. Like what you were saying, you knew that what was happening wasn't right. You knew that nothing about what was happening to you was protocol. Nothing about what was happening to you was within policy. Whenever something like that happens, first of all, you knowing that this wasn't right, and even your intuition as a person, it should be screaming, "Hey, this isn't right. There's something that's not right about this." I hate that you went through that. I hate that is a part of your narrative as a person. It's a part of.
That's just one of them.
Just one of them, right?
That's just one of them. I mean, I've had multiple experiences that were. I mean, I was 17 and had cops threaten to kill me. I was at a county fair with some friends of mine and went to the bathroom, and some white guys were in there talking about making a drug deal, and me and my friend walked out. The cops thought it was us talking and hemmed us up and thought it was us, and they started trying to frisk me, and I was like, wait a minute, what are you doing? And I was upset. I mean, I was just, and luckily for me, my mom is an attorney, and she was, at the time she was working for the district attorney's office, and I went immediately home and told her, and she drove first thing in the morning to the sheriff and spoke to the not to a deputy, to the actual sheriff, and told him, this happened to my son. This is unacceptable. It will never happen again. And gave them my mom took the car that I was driving and had it registered under the DA's office. So I just, I basically would drive and see cops pull up behind me and write in my stuff and then pull off. But I mean, I was lucky, I was lucky. I mean, when we would go out, my friends would say, no, you're driving,
So Terrence, here's my question to you. Is there anywhere the average lay person can go to get information on what are their rights when they're involved with the law enforcement? Is there like a website? Is there a state site? Where can someone go to get informed on what their quote unquote rights are? Because I didn't even know what happened to Larry. I didn't know any of that. And someone who wants to be informed when this happens, it sounds like these are good things to know.
Oh man, that is a fantastic question. It really does apply to what we're talking about, education. An educated person can't be taken advantage of. And I don't know, and I don't know if there's a specific place. I just know that you can. I mean, I would think that a simple Google search would pull up everybody's, first of all, your basic rights under the Constitution, which the Constitution is that's the law of the land. That's the layer of the law that every state's constitution and every state they have to build their laws based on that, and then it kind of branches down from there. You can public knowledge is the general statutes, whatever state you live in. There's general statutes. Whenever you're telling your story about the one cop, even though I'm listening to this scenario and playing out in my head where the one cop was calmer, and she come up and she was calm, and it just changed the atmosphere, man. It changed how you're interact. The first guy's yelling, screaming, got his gun out, that kind of stuff. I'm not going to go into details about like when officers should be like that and when they shouldn't. I mean, that's going to have to be that individual's person based on who they are as a person, based on their training. And I will say, I did want to cover something about policies and training here in a few seconds. But you can go to your state's general statutes. Mm-hmm. And if you go to the state's general statutes, you can know what's legal and what's not legal, down to the elements of that law. And the elements of that law, it has to fit all of those elements for it to be illegal. For somebody to tell you're being arrested because your plates are, okay, I don't get that at all. But you can educate yourself on what is illegal and what is not illegal. So if somebody's spitting some stuff at you about your plate is out of state and you're going to jail for that or whatever, then you come from a place of being educated. Coming from a place of being educated is huge. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. It does. But here's the problem with that. We have seen time and time again that law enforcement just seems to protect their own. You file a complaint. You file a complaint against an officer, and if you call up and you go up to the you go to the department or you go to the county office, wherever you need to go to file a complaint, they act like they're all concerned. And then either you never hear anything back, and then when you try and follow up, they just basically shove you under the table, and they say, "Oh, someone will get back to you. Someone will get back to you," and they never get back to you, and nothing ever happens. Or you try and ask them what happens, and they say, "Oh, well, those records are sealed. I'm sorry, they're not available to the public." And I'm like, "I'm not the public. I'm the complainant," and so there's nothing that can happen. I mean, I can tell you that There was a period of time, it seemed like, where I was just getting pulled over, it seemed like, on a daily basis. And I know there was a time I got pulled over and I had a cop tell me I needed to get out of the car, and he said he was going to search my car. And I said, "No, I'm not giving you permission to search my car." And he said, "I want to search your car." And I said, "Well, are you asking me or are you telling me?" And he says, "Well, I'm asking you." And I said, "Then the answer is no." And he says, "Well, what do you have to hide?" He was like, "And now it sounds to me like you have something to hide, and I'm going to call in the dogs." I said, "Please do." And I said, "But I'm not giving you, permission. If you search my car in violation, I said, none of this is going to hold up anyways. There's nothing in there. But even if you found something, it would not hold up because you're violating my constitutional rights at this point." I forgot what it is. And he was like, "Oh," so then he goes and drops the N-bomb on me and says, "Oh, you're one of those smart niggers, aren't you?" He was like, and he sat me on the edge of the curb for like a good hour and ran every warrant search he could and everything he could until he had nothing to do, and then let me go. And I filed a complaint. Nothing ever came of it. I followed up with it. Nothing ever came of it, and I mean, after a while, I can tell you, I mean, I've been pulled over so many times and had cops tell me so many ridiculous stories about why I've been pulled over and then finally let me go when they don't find when they don't find anything in the car, when they just search it illegally, or when they ask me a whole bunch of questions and realize that I'm just not some thug, then they let me go. And even when you file a complaint, nothing ever happens with it. Even if you file, you just lose hope after a while. You just like, there's no need to waste my time to go through this process when nothing's going to happen.
So Terrence, considering what he said, what type of policies we're dealing with, the background of what happened with George Floyd, and what we saw with him was recorded. Okay.
Right.
And mind you, I grew up in mostly in large cities. I mean, grew up in Los Angeles area. At one point I moved to the, to out here, obviously the DC area and Philadelphia area, back to California. So, I mean, And so maybe things are different in smaller towns. I don't know. I'm not sure how big your department is.
I tell you, I'm not.
What can be done? What could be done policy wise for some of the things that we're talking about, or is there anything that can be done policy wise?
Actually, so one of the things I wanted to cover is that at one point in time, the way I understood it before I came into law enforcement, there was an acceptable, what was considered to be an acceptable practice. If somebody was completely irate, completely out of control, whatever brought that on, if it was just their mental state, if it was a drug-induced thing, or whatever, that, or if somebody had been pepper sprayed or something like that, at one point in time, the slang term or whatever is like is hogtied. So it's whenever somebody would have their arms in shackles behind their back, their ankles in shackles, and a chain that would connect the two, and it would completely immobilize them. And I don't know how far back that goes, but at a certain point in time in law enforcement, if they realized that whenever somebody was restrained like that, and they were placed on their stomach, and they had been pepper sprayed, or they were suffering from underlying health conditions, or if they had been, like I said, chemically, something had happened. Plus, they're fighting the police, so their heart rate's up, everything's up. Um, People were passing away from that, and the policies changed. You see something happen where something like this gets brought to light, and then the policy changes. I think you would be hard pressed. You can go and watch 80s cops on Cops TV. Like, we've got a channel. We cut the cord a long time ago, so we use Roku, and there's the Cops channel. Every so often I cut that on, and then I have to cut it off because it's like being a gun expert and watching a movie about guns. You're going to be like, man, I can't watch this anymore. This is terrible. So you can watch an old 80s episode of Cops, and they're like, they might hogtie somebody, or they might put their knee on somebody's face or on their neck, and that ain't gonna fly no more. Like, what you're gonna see is like if first of all, like I said, my guys, that's a no go to me. I don't work with a group of guys that I've ever witnessed anything like that, or I've ever had as a supervisor have had to go straight to somebody and say, knock that out. That's not. Don't ever let me see you do that again. As a whole in law enforcement, one of the things that's going to come out of this, just like with the hog tying, and somebody's been been pepper sprayed, or excited delirium, or whatever. If you want to see something pretty interesting, Google excited delirium. Excited delirium is a very interesting thing that a human body goes through, and it can be induced like psychologically. Somebody has mental problems. They have a chemical in their body, or they have something that's put them in an extremely excited condition where they're extremely excited, their body's in distress, and then they pass away. How you handle that person in that situation while they're in extreme distress is critical. It is critical to their life, to their safety, and you as an officer, what you're going to have to deal with if you don't apply aid to that person. And that is heavily trained and heavily discussed in training. What I think you're going to see is that this thing with the knee on the neck, knees on the faces, anything that's even remotely like that stuff's going to go away. Even if it was never policy. What me and you talked about, Lamont, me and you have had some pretty deep conversations, like on the phone and between texts and stuff, after all this has happened, before I even knew this interview was happening. And something that I brought up was that the tragedy in this is anytime there's a wrongful death, that two people lose their lives, the victim and the perpetrator. And that goes with shootings, that goes with something like this. What takes it over into that whole nother realm is whenever somebody has taken an oath and they're behind a badge, and they get involved in something that takes another person's life. When we even first started talking about this, I said, brother, I hadn't seen the video yet. It was fairly fresh after all this had happened. And when I watched the video, man, it was like there was nothing in me that said anything that went down with that was right. There was nothing in me that said, there was nothing I could see about that was right. And what I tell you, man, I said I can't see myself or any of my guys being caught up. The problem is we're a small group, and I did some numbers here. There's 18,000 agencies in the United States, and those agencies range from one person, one man, small towns. We've got one. We've got one that's got 3 cops on duty, and it's a small town, like a middle of nowhere, one stoplight kind of place. Great people, man. The community, the law enforcement officers, but it's a small place. You got some agencies, I'm looking at numbers here, 30,000 officers. I mean, that's a lot of folks. In Larry, you said you came from big cities, man. Big cities. I don't know how many LAPD do you think are on at a time? How many LA County sheriffs are on at a time? That's a lot of people, man.
It is.
What I do know is that the majority of those guys, the majority of law enforcement, what we see is the minority of law enforcement, and the majority of those guys and gals of all ages, races, they get up, they put their boots on, they put that badge on, and they go out, they do the best they can, they do a good job, and they have a good heart, man, and they go home. Guess what? That's not the one you're going to see. That's not the one you're going to see with their knee in somebody's neck, man. And it's not the one that's going to be the one putting you in a car and take you out into a field. You know, it's unfortunate, but it creates like a skewed opinion, man. And all I can do, I can be in charge of me, and I can be in charge of the guys that are put under me. And all this stuff, man, anything like that can come from the top down. If I'm not putting my foot down and I'm not saying, guys, this is not what we're going to do. We're not going to put our knee in the back of somebody's neck, even though it never had to be addressed before. Never in my mind would I think that I would go to a scene and I would say, guys, get your knee off his neck, because I just don't work with that group of guys. I don't work with that. But seeing that and seeing this, what's going to happen is it's going to push the narrative where even people, that guy that was a 19-year-old veteran, and I don't know the man. I'm just judging on what I've seen, what I read, what I watch on the video, and the different angles that I can see for myself. But I also have a mind, I can think for myself. That guy was a 19-year-old veteran. How many times had he been in a situation where he put his knee on somebody's neck, or put his knee on somebody's face, or put his knee anywhere in that area and held that person down?
A lot.
It could have been countless, but it becomes part of like his work culture. It becomes part of him and the way that he deals with people, and it goes on for so long that when he went through that motion with that guy, it was just another day.
Mm-hmm.
It was just another thing in all the years that he had in this. And another thing you see in the dynamic of the situation is you see there are other officers involved. They were there. You see the Asian guy trying to keep people back and pushing people back, and then the other 2 were involved in holding and things like that. You have the one guy that is doing this, and just the body language. You don't have to be in law enforcement. Look at the body language. He was the top dog. He was in charge, man. He was leading the show on that. So those guys were kind of falling in line, wouldn't you say? I mean, wouldn't you agree they were falling in line with that? There is an issue right there. Is if you see something and something's going on that you just can't. As a person, first of all, you're like, hey, this ain't cool. At least say something. Be like, hey, man, this ain't cool. We need to render aid. We need to put ourselves in a position to where this human being, if he's suffering some type of distress, this is not something we're not addressing. We need to get this guy aid. And that's the kind of stuff you get in training. But it could also be the kind of stuff that by the time you're a 19-year veteran and you've been in whatever situation whatever's led him to be that as a human being, and then as a professional, and then as somebody in law enforcement, all the things, kind of like you were saying, was the things that your interactions with law enforcement over your period of your life, and then what we're seeing in the narrative, what we're seeing on the news every night, those things build you as who you are impression with law enforcement. Just as equally good interaction with law enforcement, interacting with a law enforcement officer that is a public servant, that has the heart of a public servant, can change that whole narrative too. It just doesn't get shown a lot. Whenever I come through training, I'm just looking at some of the stuff here, like asking about answers. Policy change, man. I just gave you an example of policy change where that's not acceptable to hog tie somebody anymore because people passed away from it, people died, and they're like, this can't fly anymore. We can't let this happen anymore. Something else that's been huge is community policing. Everywhere you see that community policing is made a priority, the narrative changes. People's opinions change. And I'm just going to throw something, I haven't seen any numbers out, but this is just my personal opinion. I believe if more minorities got into law enforcement, the narrative would change because a fresh perspective is being placed into it. And I can just tell you from my personal experience, going through a smaller agency and going through a smaller training group, is there was the majority young white men that went into training to be in law enforcement. And then you back it down a little bit, African American, very small portion Hispanic, and we didn't have any Asian people. But that, you got to look at my demographic, I mean, where I'm at. I mean, we're not in a huge place. But if more minorities were interested and went into law enforcement, you would see a narrative change. You'd see a perspective change because people are bringing in a fresh look into law enforcement.
You probably would, but here's part of the problem with that too, is that we live in a country where we have institutionalized racism, and there has been a concerted effort to over-police Black communities throughout the years, which then take those Black men or Black boys and they put them in the system. So you may have young boys that may have wanted to grow up to be police officers, but because their communities were over-policed and the cops went and grabbed them and put cases on them, whether they're legit or otherwise, now they come up and they're 18, 19, 21 years old. They can't become a law enforcement officer because they can't pass the background check, And, whereas maybe they did something small in my, maybe they did something, maybe they were smoking weed and they got picked up for a misdemeanor drug charge, and the cop just said, oh, well, you know what, you had this, so now instead of just saying you had a couple of joints for smoking, I'm going to arrest you and say it's for distribution. And now all of a sudden they're stacking, the DA stacking charges on them and telling them, look, you're going to end up going to jail until you're 21 years old, or you can plead out to this felony. And, and yeah, those records are supposed to be sealed if you're a juvenile, unless you're applying for a law enforcement job, And so you end up, we have a system that is designed to damage and incarcerate Black bodies. And so when you start talking about going to law enforcement, it becomes another hurdle that Black people have to jump over. And sometimes people have done wrong things, sometimes they haven't. But I know there's plenty of cops out there that are white that when they were kids, they have said, oh yeah, I was a knucklehead. I stole cars, or I smoked weed, or I did all kinds of stuff when I was a kid. And then eventually I grew out of it and I became a cop. And now, I fight all that stuff now. Well, they were given the chance to live their life. They were given the chance to put those mistakes aside by not getting arrested. I know there was plenty of times where I know I had friends where I grew up, because I grew up in a mostly white neighborhood, where I've had friends that were driving drunk when they were kids, and the cops would say, if I arrest you, it's going to ruin your life. And they would take those kids, put them in the back of their car and drive them home, and then tell one of their friends to drive their car. And I've been, I've been at a party before where I had a friend come and say, hey, can you drive my car home? This cop's going to drive me home. And I'm like, Yeah, I guess so. But
So-
I mean those are things that I have never heard of something like that being a courtesy like that being extended to a black person ever.
So it sounds like, I'm just telling you what I'm hearing, man. I'm hearing it sounds like you've had a lot of negative interaction with law enforcement, and unfortunately, that is the case for a lot of people. What would you like to see changed, man? Like, I mean, because you're educating me, you're teaching me just as much as I want. Man, I would love for a young person to be watching this video and see, hey, that's a white cop that is trying to do the right thing, and maybe change just a bit of their perspective on something. Teach me, man. Help my perspective change, because I need to hear this, because I didn't have all those negative interactions with the police, and every person has been a knucklehead. I mean,
Well,
if you're a teenager, you're a knucklehead. I've got two knuckleheads I've gotten out of the house already. So
well, I can
go ahead.
I can tell you just by listening to YouTube talk, there are three things that I done figured out we need. We need programs that either incentivize or help build more minorities working within the police department.
Absolutely.
And the other thing we need is some website, some national website that is easy and promoted, that people can go to know their rights when they're pulled over by a police officer.
Mm-hmm.
Just from this conversation, those are two things that I know we need to get going.
I'll tell you. Go ahead.
If I find some of these answers, can I just hit you up and just say, hey man, I'll shoot you a text or something? Hey, listen.
Man, of course, always.
I'll let you know. I'll get back with you on that. Specifically, if you let me, like, offline, you can tell me, exactly what precinct or whatever, and I can shoot you something and say, hey, Lamont, if you want to know what your local's policy is, here's where you find it. Will that work?
That worked for me, but I guess what I'm saying is we need some kind of a national database that they promote on TV, that people can see and they can click in the drop of a dime and be able to know, okay, this cop, he can't search my car without having a warrant. Or if I get in the back seat of his car and he takes me somewhere that's not the station, I shouldn't get out. Kind of like a PSA. That sounds like something that needs to be put in place. And
I'll tell you some of the things I would like to see. Okay. One of the things that I would like to see with officers is I would like to see that background checks are done on officers like every 5 years at least. That they have to go back through the process of going through their background check, going through their psychological, going through the psych testing, the lie detector test. I want to see them go through that whole process again. I'm not saying they have to go back through and fill out all the paperwork to file for the application and go back to the academy, but I want them to go back through the psychological part of it. I want them to go back through the background check, because there's a lot of stuff that officers do during the course of their time on the force that if they had done this before would not be allowed to be an officer. And so I know that there's when you apply for some of these jobs, they go and they talk to your family, they talk to your neighbors, they talk to some of the people that are listed as references when you apply for the job. I want them to go back and talk to some of these people and find out, is this person beating their wife? And the wife is not saying anything because they know that if they do, that the person's not going to be able to carry a gun with a domestic violence charge on their record, and so they're going to lose their job. Can they go back through, has this person joined organizations that are not that are not, and
they don't have all the people's interests at hand.
Yes. I mean, because there has been, and I know a lot of people don't want to talk about it, but there has been a concerted effort by white supremacist groups in this country to infiltrate the military and law enforcement. And the military has done quite a bit to try and root them out, but that's still a very serious problem there. And it's a serious problem in law enforcement. And they should go through and they should find out, through continued background checks if this is a problem. The other thing is they need to have those psychological, those psychological testing, whatever they do to begin, they need to do that again. And they need to, and honestly, I think especially for some of these guys that work in large departments, people that work for the LAPD, the NYPD, Chicago PD, these people need to go through, they need to have mandatory,
societal sensitivity training.
Well, not just sensitivity training, but they need to make them go through some sort of mandatory therapy, or because I hear all the time about how soldiers go to war and they're in combat or in a combat zone for 6 months, 8 months, 9 months, and they come back with PTSD. There's no possible way that you can live and work in some of the worst places of Los Angeles or Chicago or New York or Houston or wherever and not experience any PTSD when you've been working with the lowest common denominator of society for 15 or 20 years. I mean, right. All you see is the bad in people, and if you don't get any help, that is going to pepper everything in every interaction that you have. And so they need, and so it's not good enough to say, oh, well, this person passed their psych eval when they applied for the job. Yeah, because when they applied for the job, they were a bright-eyed and bushy-tailed 21-year-old. Now that they've been on the force for 20 years and they've witnessed, 500 child molestation arrests and 300 murders and 1,000 assaults and whatever else, they're not the same person anymore.
And that is a fantastic point. I'm so glad you brought that up, man, because it doesn't matter. I mean, of course, the larger the department, the larger the beast, the more problems, man. But it doesn't matter if you go into these type of careers. If you go into law enforcement, it doesn't matter if you're that. I mean, I was talking about the numbers. You're that one-man agency or you're that 30,000 agency. If you're a firefighter, if you're a law enforcement officer, if you're EMS, it is so easy to be jaded. It's so easy. I mean, it is our nature. It is human nature to look at the bad. It is human nature to think the worst. And something I've always had to tell myself to combat that is when I'm dealing with another human being, I'm dealing with them at their worst. When I'm at that domestic violence, when I'm at that overdose, that drug overdose, when I'm at that suicide, when I'm at those type of things, I'm dealing with another human being that is a complex creature. I'm a complex creature. I mean, that's, but that stuff has a way of jading somebody. You see that stuff. And like you said, I mean, that is great, man. That was a great point. The thing about it is the first and foremost thing that has to happen with a human being, especially if they're going to go into these type of careers, and they will tell you this, but it has to be personal. It can't just be something that's trained. It has to be something personal, is you have to know who you are as a person and what you can look in the mirror with and look at this face and live with, what you can lay your head down with at night. That has to be the core of what guides every action that you do. Faith, family, and friends. I call it the 3 F's. You've got to have stuff like that to rely on. Hobbies. Why do you think I'm a video game geek? I mean, why do you think I got my Nintendo? I build Pac-Man. I mean, I build pinball machines, digital pinball machines, and I build my own arcade machines and stuff. I love that stuff. It is such a healthy outlet, and it's universal. Everybody loves Pac-Man. I mean, it doesn't matter the age. So,
I think Miss Pac-Man looked better.
But these people that are in these positions, they have to have these anchors. And I do agree that an agency should be providing some outlets as well. And I'll give you, I won't go into extreme detail, but a very personal experience is I watched somebody like shoot themselves in the head in front of me. And they made a decision, were they going to shoot me or are they going to shoot themselves? I was prepared for either action. They took themselves out. I had to live with that. They're gone. But right. I had to live with that. And then the stress that comes with that. And then my wife can tell you, if we were just watching a TV show and somebody put a gun to their head on the TV show, I had to turn away. and look the other way. And that, like, and it's just a TV show. It's fake. It's not real. But it takes me to a real place. It's a trigger. If you don't have something that's deeper than just, because the agency called me when it was all over the next day, the third man down on the totem pole called me and said, "Hey, Terrence, if you need help, if you ever need to talk to somebody, I'm here. We've all been through this. We've been doing this 30 years. Here are your outlets. Here are the numbers. Here are who you can call, and it's all on us. Just let us know." That stuff has to be provided, because you can become jaded as a human being. And I don't know this officer. I just kind of keep going back to, this is the latest thing that's happening. But like you, Lamont, you know, you put up, I was watching one of your videos and you put up 18 names of people that were killed in some sort of interaction with law enforcement. I think that was the last video that you did. Even if 4 officers were directly involved in each one of those killings, I'm saying directly, they had their hands on, they were there. I'm not talking about the bigger picture, like Larry was talking about, how it comes down, you know, what's happening up here, this is kind of trickling down. But that's 72 officers that could have been involved, even if there's 4. I'm just making up numbers. I don't know how many officers. That's 72 people, man. That's 72 people that could have been involved with these 18 names. What if one of the people that was involved in each one of these things was anchoring and rooting into something that prevented that action from happening? If they were anchored, them as a human being had something to anchor to and say, this is not how this interaction is going to go today, we would be talking a whole
So
But
that's
we're not.
part of the
And that,
issue. But let me get this one first. That's part of the problem that I think we need a solution to, because nothing is rooting them to do right. See, you're rooted to do right because of who you are. These guys are rooted to do right based on apparently only consequence. And what a lot of people are frustrated with is when officers do these things, they're not paying consequences. So how do we get consequences to be played equally so that justice is served, Terrence? What does that look like? Do officers have to talk amongst each other? How do you get justice just to be equally played? And I would even venture to say that because you are an officer of the law, if you mess up, you should probably be held to a higher standard.
Right. Now, every person is going to be held to the standard of the law. I understand what you're saying. I understand that you say, "Hey, I put that badge on. I put on that I grab that briefcase and go to the school as a teacher. I put on this collar and I stand in a pulpit." These are all positions where people are placed in a position where you understand going into that you should be held to a higher standard, high accountability. The slippery slope that we get into is whenever you push something over into, and I'm just trying to rationalize as a law enforcement officer, murder's murder. And if somebody murders somebody or kills another human being with ill intent, I don't quite see how you can pursue that person at a higher standard than any other human being that took another man's life. However, when you don't see something, it sparks this. It is like a flame to that tinder, that bomb you were talking about on one of your other videos. This is a bomb that's been building for a while, and then there's a match that sets it off. Whenever the public doesn't see something or they perceive something as an injustice, I mean, that's the tinder. That's what's going to just burst into flames, and that's what we're dealing with right now. Is people, you place those officers in a higher position because guess what? They put the badge on. They got behind something. They took an oath, and it puts your psyche over into something different than if another man just took another man's life. If 2 men got in a fight and another man killed another man, if another man wanted another man's things, you know, and he was armed armed robbing that person and shot and killed that person. A murder
Right.
is a murder. Killing is
Let,
killing.
let me rephrase it then. Let me rephrase it.
Okay.
Instead of saying putting them in a higher position, I just want to say I just want them to get the same equal treatment for killing
Right.
Sean John that if Pookie Johnson killed Sean John, he'd be up the creek within 2 shakes of a salt shaker. That's all I'm saying. It seems like the cops.
I get that.
Right. That's what I'm saying.
And Terrence, just to go back to my point a bit, and I get what you're saying about, you know, when that incident happened with you, that people reached out to you and said there's resources available to you that you could utilize. And I think that's great. I think all officers should have those resources available. I think all people in general should have those resources available to them if they suffer something traumatic or witness something traumatic like that. But what I'm talking about is having cops go back through those psychological evaluations every few years. If you're a police officer or a deputy or whatever else, an agent, and you are going to be on the force for just let's say 20 years, and you have to go through that every 5 years, that's only 4 times. That's not
So
like you're expecting them. That's not like you're expecting them to go through this process every year, every 6 months. You're talking about every 4 years, or every 5 years, 4 times if over a course of a 20-year career. So, I mean, I think what they have found at times is they'll say when you end up with these bad officers, oh, well, he was a bad officer. He had all these complaints. He was suffering from this or from that, and it went undetected. We didn't know. It just sort of went under the radar. Well, if you have these people going back through the psychological evaluations, if they're going back through their background checks, and you find, I mean, we've seen where there's been officers where they go through it later on, they dig up and they find that this person is like a member of some white supremacist group, or they posted all kinds of racist comments on various threads and forums and whatever else. Well, these are things that can be uncovered during an updated background check. And if these things are revealed, these people should be let go and not allowed to ever carry a badge again. And the problem is that to even bring something like that up, the police unions immediately jump in and say, oh, no, we can't have that. We can't have that. I mean, people talk about the teachers union, the police unions are insane how powerful they are, and they're given the public trust. And and oftentimes they're committing crimes under the color of the law. It's just it's unacceptable, and this is why you're seeing people that have absolutely no trust. I mean, I'll tell you right now, short of somebody putting a gun on me and holding a gun on me, if a black person did something to me, I would not call the police on them, because I mean, if a black dude stole my camera, if I knew who did it, I would probably try and get it back myself. I would not call the police on them, because for me to do that for me, I'm saying that camera is worth more than his life, because that potentially means if he's confronted by that officer, it could turn out where he gets killed. I don't want my fellow man getting killed. Now, if it's a white person, I'm not going to think twice about it, because I know that the police treat white people differently. I mean, we've seen it where a white kid will walk into a church and murder 9 people, and they literally drove his ass to Burger King on the way to jail. They took him to the drive-thru and got him Burger King because they said, well, we had to get him something to eat. So we drove him there and we took him into I mean, that shit is crazy. That's just asinine.
Well, we're not. Got to get ready to get him out of here. We're not going to solve everything tonight. Yeah.
It's a deep thing.
But they need to continue the background checks. It can't be one thing at the beginning of your career and that's it. Because you're not dealing with the same person at the end of a career. You're not dealing with the same person at the middle of a career. A person I am 40 something years old, and I can tell you for a fact, the person I am today is not who I was when I was 21 years old. And that is when I could have become a cop. That's when I could have started my career in law enforcement at 21, and I am not that same person. So
Terrence, we're going to have to bring you back maybe in a couple of weeks, because this could draw out for a couple of weeks. But we did get some I think we were successful in coming up with some solutions that we might have to pass along to the politicians, to the local leaders, to the people that can actually put these things in place. Some of this stuff sounds really, really good. And we just appreciate you coming through on this channel. Larry, we always appreciate your stories. And might I add, I could use a new camera. I mean, if you ain't telling on nobody, man, leave that window open. I could use me a new camera. But anyway, so Terrence,
thank you guys. I just want to tell you, thank you so much, Lamont. Thank you, Larry. Thank you guys for having me, man. Part of changing the big picture and we got to think deep, guys. You guys are deep thinkers. We got to think deep. We got to think deep as citizens. We got to think deep as individuals, man. And changing the narrative and even just having this conversation is kind of like everybody puts their neck out on the line. Everybody gets a little uncomfortable, but that's the only way anything ever happens, man. So thank you guys so much.
Oh, thank you, man. Thank you.
Man, thanks for coming through.
And promote your YouTube channel so that people know you also do tech just like Larry.
Yeah, I have a YouTube channel, Level by Level Gaming. I do retro gaming. I build arcade machines. I do virtual pinball. I do repairs. I mean, you just think of anything 10 years old and older in the video game thing. I mean, that's my gig. And like I said before, this is the first time I've actually ever went on social media and made any kind of reference to law enforcement or anything like that. That's my gig, man. That's what I do on the side. So that's what I come home, man, and I just pop in some Mario 3 and just let it all go.
Wow. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I will leave his link for you guys to go join his YouTube channel. Check him out. You know, I met him over gaming. He got an Elgato. We met over game. He wanted to record his gaming. I told him I was a legend on Madden and I was retiring because I had become a lover man. I had a wife now and I was retiring from gaming. I gave it up. So I gave him the video capture device and he's been a friend ever since. And that's been some years. So check the video description. Don't forget to like the video, comment, subscribe, check out his channel, check out Larry's channel. And y'all know me and Larry and the other Avenger will be back tomorrow night at 9. And until that next Sexy as Hell video, we'll see you.
Peace.
All right, guys.
Peace.